Once a quiet gathering of Western powers, today it's one of the most powerful summits on Earth. From Cold War maneuvering to climate change, digital threats, and artificial intelligence, the G7 summit shapes the world stage. This is VNN, and today we're breaking down the full history of the G7, how it began, how it evolved, and what it means now in a rapidly shifting global order. Let's get into it. The G7 wasn't born out of grand design. It began with a dinner. In 1975, leaders from France, West Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, and the United States met in Rambouillet, France. Why? To tackle runaway inflation, oil shocks, and rising unemployment, all threatening the global economy. Canada joined the following year in 1976, and the European Union was later granted observer status. These were not just economic powerhouses, they were Cold War allies. And this informal group became a space for frank, off-the-record conversation, not bureaucratic negotiation. Through the 1980s and 1990s, the G7 evolved. No longer just about economics, leaders began discussing global security, debt relief for developing nations, and eventually, climate change. After the Cold War ended, Russia was invited to join in the late 90s, forming the G8. But that didn't last. In 2014, following Russia's annexation of Crimea, the country was suspended. The group reverted back to the G7, reaffirming its commitment to democratic values and international law. Unlike the UN or WTO, the G7 isn't a legal institution. It doesn't pass laws or enforce rules. So what's the point? Influence. The G7 nations represent about 40% of global GDP. Their joint communiques, though not binding, set political and economic tone globally. Whether it's coordinating sanctions, pledging vaccine funds, or pushing for green transitions, G7 declarations often ripple through international institutions and markets. The G7 presidency rotates annually, and the host nation sets the agenda. That's why Canada, when hosting in 2018, pushed Indigenous issues, gender equality, and climate action. The 2025 summit, hosted by Canada again, is high stakes, with global wars, AI policy, and China's assertiveness all on the table. Each summit is not just a photo op, it's a symbolic assertion of leadership. And sometimes, it reveals cracks in the Western alliance. The G7 has faced plenty of criticism. Protesters often accuse it of being elitist, unaccountable, and dominated by wealthy nations ignoring the global South. Even inside the group, tensions flare. In 2018, Trump pulled out of the G7 statement last minute, calling host Justin Trudeau very dishonest and weak. Yet despite internal rifts, the G7 has taken unified stances on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, pledged climate financing, and most recently, discussed global AI governance. We no longer live in a G7-dominated world. China, India, and others are asserting influence through groups like the G20, BRICS, and regional alliances. The G7 knows this, and it's adapting. While still a Western-led group, it has increasingly invited Global South leaders to join sessions, from the African Union to ASEAN. In 2024, Italy invited leaders from across Africa, signaling a shift toward global inclusion, or at least the optics of it. For Canada, the G7 is more than diplomacy. It's leverage. It's a chance to punch above its weight on the world stage. Canada has often been the broker, the moderate voice pushing for consensus between heavyweights like the US, France, and Germany. As host in 2025, Prime Minister Mark Carney has a big opportunity, especially with growing tensions between Canada and China, US trade battles, and the global AI race. From oil crises to AI ethics, the G7 has remained a key venue for global decision-making, for better or worse. As power becomes more decentralized in our multipolar world, the G7 is under pressure to prove it still matters. Will it adapt or fade? We'll be watching. This was The History of the G7 Summit, Explained on VNN. For more in-depth breakdowns on global politics, trade wars, and rising powers, hit that follow button and subscribe to Voice News Network.